very interesting presentation. Does anybody have questions?
Yeah, I have one. I really appreciate the presentation, and I think you started hitting on the question that I have at the end there. But I'm curious, so oftentimes we have these ideas of what the problems are, and then we go in and we find out that we're wrong. And so I'm curious how much you adapted or pivoted or any of those kind of manipulations to the original kind of intent, given that this is a really focused on like urine. I mean, did you have stakeholders come back and say, no, that's not the most critical thing, or whoa, I'm just totally out of my realm? Like, how did you kind of get this body of stakeholders to all unify around it, or did that happen organically? And yeah, can you just kind of go into that process of collecting all around this singular topic, and then specifically the pharmaceutical piece? So to any three.
Okay, I guess I'll start. Julia, you can add, or Julia and Shana can add. But we were initially very much focused on urine, and I think we found from most of our stakeholders that they hadn't really thought that much about that until we started talking about it. So once we started talking about it, most of the time people are thinking, wow, that's really a good idea. We really ought to try not to just put our urine down the drain, or mix our urine with potable water. So people, I think, people are generally sort of supportive of the idea and are interested in continuing to talk about it, but they raise these kinds of questions that we've talked about. But then they also, it does expand out into a lot of other questions about, how we're dealing with the feces, for example. That often comes up. It's like, why are we just talking about the urine? Why not? Aren't we also talking about the feces? And then questions about just waste management in general, septic systems, groundwater, lots of questions about different application methods, how this would work in different settings on different kinds of farms, what kind of crops, what does it work on? So we have tried to, take all those questions and turn them into research proposals to learn more about it. But at least within our organization, Rich Earth Institute, we had this collaboration with the University of Michigan, and they're going on to do other work themselves, and there's still some collaboration with them, but our team has gone on to develop a for-profit, I guess, an LLC, to develop tools for applying this at a building scale. Because those are the kind of questions people have too. Well, this won't really work unless, it's done at a much larger scale. So, going on in those directions, treatment technologies, and we've also done a lot of agricultural research to look at how urine can work in different settings. As far as the feces part of it goes, we're also looking at that as well, but we continue to sort of have urine be the primary focus, just because it's a lot easier to deal with in a lot of ways than the feces. But do you want to add to that, Julia?
Yeah, well, sort of connected to the question about, why urine. We also have a new grant that we're working on that's kind of a sort of bridge between conventional sanitation systems and this like idealistic future vision, which is looking at making biochar out of biosolids from wastewater treatment plants, which is something that exists that has a huge problem with PFAS already. And so making biochar out of it can remove up to 98% of the PFAS. And then looking at that in combination with something like source separated urine as soil amendments. So kind of trying to find those like bridge points between, the linear flows we have and the circular system we want. I think one of the other things that has been surprising to me that we've learned from our stakeholders is that a lot of people kind of have an awareness that this is something that happened in the past or that happens in other communities, or that happens that their grandmother did in the Depression or something. And so I think something I've been trying to do, I'm Rich Earth's education director, so I do a lot of education to folks of different ages, but kind of like uplifting that kind of like history and context of the broader picture, and talking to like kids in school about it and that whole thing. Yeah, Jenna.
That's super fascinating. Was curious, you mentioned about, different, risk perceptions and, concerns. Did you see any trends of who, had these different, who your stakeholders had specific concerns, or were they kind of blanketed across?
I think, we've so far in our research, I mean, even though this was a 4 or 5 year project, it still was fairly limited in the numbers of people we actually were able to talk to. So we want to do lots more research to understand this better, that question better, because that's really important. But so far, it seems like, and Julia's, done a lot of, citizen science, or trying to, hear from people about their own experiences. And so that is also going to teach us more about what people's concerns are. But so far, it seems like the farmers in general tend to be less concerned about the risks, because they have a lot of experience using other amendments that maybe have more risks or similar risks, like manure already has a lot of unknown contaminants in it. So, they're aware of that. So they have sort of more of a comparison to make, but they're concerned about what their customers might think or what their buyers might think. So we have to talk to the customers and the buyers to figure out, well, what level of risk are they sort of willing to accept? And then in terms of the general public, I think there it ranges a lot just by individual sort of differences in terms of what risk people are willing to tolerate, or how. I mean, we've had some people who are just really concerned about very minute, potential for risk, and others who are like, oh, it seems fine to me. So I don't know if you, Julia, are seeing it.
Speaking to that, just a quick follow-up question, so you said that there were minute quantities in the crops. I'm wondering which pharmaceuticals or which chemicals you tested for?
Yeah, so they chose a kind of suite of something like 15 different chemicals that were kind of representative of the different types of pharmaceuticals that are in wastewater, including the most common ones like caffeine. And so what they found for caffeine, which was the, of course, highest present one, was that, one of the ways of communicating its presence in crop tissue was that you'd have to eat a pound of urine fertilized lettuce every day for 2,000 years to get the same amount of caffeine that's in a cup of coffee. So it's kind of those kind of like tiny amounts, but they did choose. And I think they also added a few different hormones in the second trial that they did as well.
Yeah, I mean, because it makes a big difference. Caffeine, I wouldn't be concerned about, but minute amounts of hormones, I might. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's what, I think one of the issues that we were wanting to raise with this presentation was that the issues with communication about this stem from that there are perceptions that may be unrealistic, and then there are about risk, and then there are perceptions that actually may be quite realistic, like minute amounts of some hormones may be of concern. So trying to figure out how you deal with those two kinds of concerns and effectively communicate, and also take those concerns from the stakeholders and communicate them to the technical team so that they are aware, or start thinking about what additional research do we really need to do, because there are differences of opinion within the technical people that we're working with on how much of these risks need to be really addressed in the research, versus those that we think, or the technical team thinks, are really not significant concerns. And then, there's a lot of areas that we haven't investigated yet. For example, have focused so far with the technical work on impacts on plants, but not so much on impacts in soil. on soil microorganisms and things like that. And that's a question that a lot of our farmer stakeholders have raised as a concern. So we're working on some funding for additional research in that area now.
Very, very interesting project. Great. I think it's great. We're at 11 o'clock. I'm sure that, I don't know if anyone wants to stay on and continue the discussion, or, for those of you that need to move on to other work meetings or whatever. Thank you for coming today. We will have all of these presentations on our website, and we'll provide everybody with a link to that and a DOI for your presentation. We'll send out a notice to everybody where they can watch these if they would like to watch them again.
If I can just add a word of thanks, I really appreciate each of the presentations today. It's been great. Thank you for putting those together and for the discussion that we've had. It's been phenomenal. And yeah, this concludes our 2022, at least our spring 2022 lightning talks. We had 2 great sessions last week as well. And then a reminder that we do have a all hands meeting for the Research Coordination Network coming up on June 1. We'll make sure that you get a invite to that if you're not already a member of the RCN, and that'll largely be an update from the 5 different working groups on what they're each doing.
Yeah, and we're always looking for new members of the working groups. So if you would like to attend that meeting and see if there are any of those working groups you'd be interested in, we would be very happy to have you.
Much. This is great.
Great.
And I just wondered too, I don't know if you can send a link out to all of the lightning talks, but that would be awesome, maybe to the whole group and those who weren't able to.
Yes, definitely. We are planning to do that.
Well, thank you so much. I loved it. Great. My mind is reeling with all kinds of ideas and more questions, of course, but I think the only other thing that I really, am thinking about through all of this is, I feel like there is such a need to that we are transitioning to kind of a reuse economy, where we have to learn to reuse our everything that we have, water and soil and food waste and housing and all of those things. And there are contaminants involved in almost all of them. And so how do we, it feels to me like I know that there's a shift in the sciences to try to figure out how do we deal with all of these things. But I know even in historic homes, for example, that, where I work to try to save a lot of them, we have lead-based paint in houses. And so even if it's an issue about what happens to that, even if you try to mitigate it. And so that's one of the big looming questions for me in all of this is like because I think in our focus groups, a lot of times, sometimes the conversation kind of ends when people say, well, there's contaminants everywhere. So, what are we going to do? We have to eat, we have to drink, we have to do these things, and this is what we've got. And so not much we can do about it. And if we change our behavior, it's not going to solve the whole problem. So that's the big looming question that kind of keeps popping up for me, and that I would love to, can't we solve that problem in this group?
That would be awesome and probably impossible.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's just a fascinating take on risk perception and I think there's a lot of work I'm particularly interested in the urine now too, because it's not a typical risk that's explored in these fuse systems, right? And it has a whole different connotation on risk perception because it's a very personal risk,
Right.
versus sort of a societal risk of like, oh, we're going to run out of water, or we're going to run out of food, or right. Like this is a very personal, like it's going to impact my individual health. And I think there's a lot of potential growth in our understanding of risk perception based on that. You know, how do people address constructively these relative risks, and then how much does the information, the modeling, actually help to address those risks? Because I think that's the other part of it. It's the acknowledgement of the risks, but then the actual and the perceptions of that risk, but then the actual physical risks that exist are wildly different typically. And so this is an interesting system to study that in. I hope we can look for some good correlations and good opportunities to learn from both types.
Yeah, I guess I would assume that though that probably the contaminants in the food that got fertilized by the urine were lower than the contaminants in the water that got treated and released. So
Yeah, that's sort of our key, or that's a key belief assumption that we're working with, that the soil microorganisms do a pretty good job of breaking down the potential contaminants so that not that many of them get into the plants. That's the idea of, you know, land applied versus letting them just go. And because the treatments, the wastewater treatment, as many of you know, I'm sure, but the wastewater treatment systems don't actually treat a lot of these contaminants at all. I mean, some of them are treated, but some of them aren't. I don't know.
it's really expensive to treat them.
Exactly. So, but, and I think what you were saying, that because it's personal, I mean, it does seem like because it's personal bodily fluid, it does somehow cause people to feel differently about it, you know, than they think about something that's less personal, just like cow urine is going on your food also, but people don't, you know, somehow think differently about it. So, and cow urine may have more contaminants in it than human urine. So,
Well, and phosphorus is primarily mined, and there's so many
Yeah, right.
contaminants in phosphorus. So that's going on the food.
and then there's this bigger question that I hear, you know, that the bigger question about whether the information, trying to give people the information about the level of contaminants, as, you know, Julia was doing, you know, whether that means anything to certain people. That type of information might not be useful. And so if it's not, then what other type of information is going to be useful to people is a big question that I think we have to try to figure out.
Yeah, it might contribute to the level of despair that we're all feeling right now.
Right. Right. But we find one of the things we found that I guess didn't say is that humor, people love to talk about pee. So somehow the humor, that was another finding that we had, was that the humor around it is really helpful. You know, that it enables conversations, because people just love to make jokes and puns. And it's just, for some reason, it really sparks that type of thing.
Is there a word for that? I know poo humor is scatological. Do they have a word for urine
For pee
humor? I wonder.
I was going to say, it just goes to show that bringing everything down to an 8th grade level is what you end up having to do, right?
Yes, next you
For
need
some
to
people,
write
depends.
sorry.
Depends on the audience, you know, different contexts. That's what Shana was saying earlier, really different communication strategies for different contexts. So important.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I have to sign off, but great
Yeah.
session.